family are still alive, they'll be absolutely amazed. So I set out to look for James Fulthorpe, although I didn't realise his name was Fulthorpe at the time. I thought it was either Woodthorpe or Woolthorpe because of the inferior quality of the recording. And I went through naval records, electoral rolls, this, that, every avenue I could possibly explore, and I couldn't find these people at all. And so I put them to one side and thought I'll have another go at some other time. So I came back to them later and thought, is there something else I can do? In the final analysis, I thought enough years have gone by to actually contact the address where he said his home was on that recording. So I sent a letter there saying, "Dear Sir, Madam, during the war years, you had a Mr. and Mrs. Fulthorpe living there. Do you or any of your neighbours know anything about it at all?" Unbeknown to me, they passed the letter on to someone that was James Fulthorpe's sister-in-law. She sent a very nice letter back saying the name was Fulthorpe, and that was the first time it gave me a new avenue to explore. And, that he did come back after the war. But he's now been dead for about 25 years, as indeed his wife Phyllis is too. And she didn't know the whereabouts of Carlton because she had lost touch with him. That was the young lad that was 4.5 years old. But now I had the name Fulthorpe, I went on the electoral roll looking for Carlton Fulthorpe, and surprise, surprise, out of the whole country there is only one Carlton Fulthorpe. So I tried to ring the number, ex-directory. So I said, is there anything anyone can do to help me get to this guy? So the directory inquiry said, well, no, the only way is if it's an emergency, contact the police and they will contact him. And I thought, well, it's not emergency. So I sent a letter saying, "Dear Sir, if you're the Carlton Fulthorpe that lived in Lewin, Cornwall, and whose father was a submariner, I have some news which will be of interest to you about your late father." The next day, he came on the phone, and he said, "This is Carlton Fulthorpe." I said, "Are you the Carlton Fulthorpe?" And he said, "Yes." And then I told him what I had, and there was a silence which seemed to go on for a couple of minutes. It was just so strange. His attitude originally was, or it seemed to me, it was like, who is this guy? Is he trying to make a few bob out of me or what, or something like that? But as I relayed the story to him, it got a lot easier about it. And then he was very grateful, and I said I will send him this recording. Throughout and I told him a lot of information about his father, some of which he didn't know, which was very kindly supplied by George Malcolmson of the Royal Navy Museum and Archive section, and he supplied the story that I've related so far about how he was in action and the boat that he was on, the HMS Sybe. And he was a great, great help. And I think I've eventually convinced Carlton that he is going to donate his medals to the museum because his dad won the DSM, which is the second highest award you can get in wartime. He's quite a hero, this James Fulthorpe. So I understand he's going to donate them to the museum. And hopefully when he does donate them to the museum, I'm going to go down there and the three of us can meet up, which would be so, so nice. That is the story to date. I've put the recording where it firmly belongs with the son, and I've sort of reunited his family that have been lost touch for a while. Here the story ended, as far as I know so far.
It's an amazing story. Now, when you first made the discovery of that recording, what went through your mind? Because to me, I think it's very evocative, very emotional recording, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. It's very emotional, and that's the first thing that got me. And I thought, what happened to James Fulthorpe? And I was very worried about contacting the address initially because I thought I don't want to open up old wounds, what we were taught about the Germans during the war, our own propaganda as well as theirs, that they were very nasty people, and it wouldn't be beyond them to do the interview to show what nice guys they are, and then put a bullet in his head afterwards. But I thought, well, all these years have gone by, there won't be any wounds to open up, there won't be any crying. And that's when I got in touch with this old address and sorted it out. And it was very, very emotional. And I've never done anything in my whole life that has been so satisfying as to achieve this.
Why do you think then, in terms of why it was so satisfying, that you just had this overwhelming emotional feelings? Was it almost a relief? What was it like?
Well, while I was trying to find them, and I know this sounds terribly trite and corny, but it felt like I had a calling that I had to reunite these two together. And when he came on the phone and said, "This is Carlton Fulthorpe," and we had a nice long chat about it, I came off the phone and I stood up in the air. I mean, I can't explain to the listeners, but you'll know what I mean. I stood up in the air, threw my fist up in the air, punched the air and said, "Yes!" And it was so brilliant, but I had tears in my eyes.
And how do you think Carlton really felt then when he knew that he was going to get this recording of his father?
Well, Carlton, by his own admission, is not a very emotional person. Me, by my own admission, I'm the extreme opposite. He said on a television interview last week, he said, "I'm not an emotional person," but it nearly drew a tear to my eye. But what was the most important thing for me is, on that television interview, they showed a picture of his mum and dad and him around about that age. And that's the first time I had seen them. And these ghosts that have haunted me for these 30-odd years, suddenly I could put flesh and bone to. And they were real people all of a sudden. And to me, that was the highlight, to see them.
When you realised that you had found Carlton and this, to a certain extent, was going to be the end of your, quest, what did you feel then?
Oh, I sank right down because I was so hyped up for days and days. I was sort of living off this. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, I don't have a challenge anymore. It's found its rightful place. As I say, the original is in the museum, Royal Navy Submarine Archives Museum. I found its right place. What do I do now? And I thought, I don't do anything now. That's it. I've done it. So I've just gone back to a normal humdrum life.
Now, you've met Carlton, haven't you?
No, I actually haven't met
him.
Carlton. We spoke many times on the phone. Hopefully we are going to meet up. As I say, if and when he donates his dad's medals to the museum, I'm going to try and make it so that George Malcolm's and Carlton and Carlton prefers to be called Carl for whatever reason. Hopefully that we can all meet up where the museum is. And it'd be so wonderful, because that will then be complete closure for me. Complete closure.
In terms of the timing that this story has come to light, of course, it's the run-up to D-Day. Do you think that has any significance to you?
No, because what happened at D-Day is nothing to do with the story of James Fulthorpe and his submarine and when he got captured. As I say, he was held prisoner in 1943. The war was over in 1945. So it's got nothing really to do with the D-Day landings. But of course it prompts people's memories as to what was happening all around at that time.
Circle 106.6 FM. Your life, your music. Circle 106.6 FM.
Now then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, a mission to track down the family of a prisoner of war has ended successfully after something like 30 years. James Fulthorpe was interviewed by the Germans when they took over Radio Luxembourg's offices during the Second World War. Years later, Nottingham man Alan Bailey discovered a recording of the interview and decided to track down the man's family. Laura Morris has been finding out more. She's with us at the moment. So, Laura, this really is a fascinating story. Take us back, if you would. Where was the discovery actually made?
Well, Alan Bailey used to work at Radio Luxembourg's offices, and during his time there, he rescued a collection of old unwanted 78s. He told us about what he found in amongst them.
I came across these 5 German recordings, which were going to be thrown away. And I thought, oh, they look interesting. They're historic, World War II. And I was interested in World War II memorabilia at that time. So I just took them home and they just rested there. And then I thought one day, right, I'll have a listen to them. And among all the German speaking stuff on it, which I didn't really understand fully, was this English interview with James Fulthorpe. And I thought, oh, that'll be so nice to be able to reunite his 4.5-year son with this voice. And maybe if the family is still alive, they'll be absolutely amazed. So I set out to look for James Fulthorpe.
Little did he know it was going to take some years to track down James Fulthorpe's family.
So what did the recordings say?
Well, we have a sample of the recording. James is sending a message to his wife Phyllis and his son Carlton, and I think it's fairly easy to distinguish what he's saying.
Hello, darling. It's your husband, Jimmy, speaking. I just want you to know I'm fine, very fit. Give my love to my little boy, Carlton. Tell him to look after his mummy while his daddy's away. Well, that's just about all I can say, but keep your chin up. Let's hope the war's soon over. Goodbye.
It's really quite emotional, isn't it? And that's the sort of propaganda that the Germans would have been using to convince everybody that they weren't that bad.
So what more do we know then about James Fulthorpe?
Well, he was a submariner who was on a tour of duty around Sicily in 1943. It was at a time when the Italians were fighting with the Germans against the British. He sunk a merchant ship, but he and his crew were forced to surface after battleships honed in around them and German aircraft shot at them in the water. But he was rescued by the Italian Navy and spent the rest of the war in a concentration camp. He did return home after the war and he died about 25 years ago.
So how easy was it to track James's family down?
Well, not very easy at all, but after several unsuccessful attempts, Alan managed to track down a Carlton Fulthorpe, and Alan takes up the story.
I sent a letter saying, "Dear sir, if you're the Carlton Fulthorpe that lived in Lewin, Cornwall, and whose father was a submariner, I have some news which will be of interest to you about your late father." The next day, he came on the phone. And he said, "This is Carlton Fulthorpe." I said, "Are you the Carlton Fulthorpe?" And he said, "Yes." And then I told him what I had, and there was a silence which seemed to go on for a couple of minutes. You know, it's just so strange. His attitude originally was, who is this guy? Is he trying to make a few bob out of me or what, or something like that? But as I relayed the story to him, it got a lot easier about it. And then he was very grateful, and I said, I will send him this recording.
It's an amazing story. Now, when you first made the discovery of that recording, what went through your mind?
I was very worried about contacting the address initially because I thought, I don't want to open up old wounds, you know. But I thought, well, all these years have gone by. There won't be any wounds to open up. There won't be any crying. And it was very, very emotional. And I've never done anything in my whole life that has been so satisfying as to achieve this.
Was it almost a relief? What was it like?
Well, while I was trying to find them, and I know this sounds terribly trite and corny, but it felt like I had a calling that I had to reunite these two together. And when he came on the phone and said, "This is Carlton Fulthorpe," and we had a nice long chat about it, I came off the phone and I stood up in the air. I mean, I can't explain to listeners, but you'll know what I mean. I stood up in the air, threw my fist up in the air, punched the air and said, "Yes!" And it was so brilliant, but I had tears in my eyes.
It's a fascinating tale. Sadly, Alan found out that Phyllis, James's wife, had actually died. But the original recording has now been handed to the Royal Navy Submarine Museum in Hampshire. Alan hopes that Carlton may hand over his father's medals, including the DSM, to the museum, and they may meet up in the future.
What a wonderful story, and it's nice to hear from the old mate Al Bailey once again. Thank you very much, Laura. Laura Morris reporting on Saga 106.6 FM.
These days I feel guilty mainly about spending the money I do on records. And it is to records, well, a record, we now turn. Chapter 4, in which, through antique technology, a voice speaks across the years. "I say," says young Alan Bailey, raising himself on one elbow, "I say, you chaps, guess what I've found?" "Come on, you rotter," cried Midwood of the Remove. "We're going to be late for interpretative dancing." No, I can't keep this up. What it is that Alan Bailey was formerly a sound engineer with Radio Luxembourg, Fab 208 to some of us, and during the war, when the Grand Duchy was occupied by Axis forces, the station was compelled to broadcast Nazi propaganda. These broadcasts were pre-recorded onto discs. Alan discovered some of these records, several of which featured messages recorded by British prisoners. Here is an extract from one of those discs.
Now the next message is to a village in Cornwall, to Lou, L-O-O-E, and it is for Mrs. Fulthorpe, the wife of James Fulthorpe, who lives at 27 Woodland View. And here is James Fulthorpe himself to send her greetings. Hello, darling.